As you join, if you would, you may or may not get prompted for a poll, but if you, I don't know if you have to click the poll button or if it pops up on your screen, but if you would love to hear about your interest for future topics. That's really the purpose of the poll, as we're looking to continue our monthly webinar series that we ran during COVID last year very successfully, between 300 and 500 or 600 people on our webinars, and we just heard a lot of positive feedback about those. So we wanted to kind of kick that off again as the world starts to get back to normal, or a new normal anyway. So thanks everybody who's been along with us for the journey, and would love to hear your inputs again on that poll for future topics. Oh, there's the poll on my screen. So I've got 1 o'clock. The attendee count is still growing. Probably going to give another 2 minutes for the audience here, just to let the stragglers roll in, and then we'll get going and kind of do some quick housekeeping, and then get intros going and start into the content. So we'll start about 1:02. That's Central Time. It's good to see that the Zoom fatigue has not taken everybody out. I know that I've now got at least Zoom and Teams. Not seeing as much like WebEx and other stuff these days. It's pretty much Zoom and Teams. A lot of Teams these days. I've heard they may even get into the webinar side of the deal, so maybe we'll do one on Teams one day. We use both. You never know, customers. You just got to kind of keep them both handy these days. Okay, let's see. I hid the bar. I'm going to ask Joe. Hey, Joe, do you know how to make on Zoom the bar reappear?
1 second. Let me figure that out for you. You might have to exit full screen and quit sharing.
You know what? I have the Q&A up, so I don't have the chat up, so I can do without the chat. I'll let you guys do the chatting.
No worries.
I'll do the talking. And Joe, you can just relay stuff, you know, if need be when we get to it, since my chat's not up. But Q&A I do have up on my other screen. So if anybody wants to submit questions, we'll go ahead and get started now at 1:02. And yeah, if you would, 2 things for the folks that are still joining. One is that we've got a poll on some future topics. If you just kind of let us know what your interest might be, or if you've got another idea, we'll ask here in just a second about future topics. And then second thing is, if you've got questions that you'd like to hear about around community solar or any kind of distributed generation, we're going to talk about solar today. Please put those through on the question and answer. I think all the panelists will be looking at those, and as they occur to you, and we'll try to hit those topics and hit those points as we go, and you know, we'll use that to help track and make sure that we try and, if we can, answer all your questions today. Okay, so just welcome again. If you're joining us, this is Community Solar the Next Big Thing for Brokers? We're kicking off again our Enerex monthly webinar series. We ran 8 or 10 webinars last year at the beginning of COVID, really kind of just bringing people together as the whole world was transitioning and into this sort of uncertain marketplace. And a lot of things have happened since then. We've got Winter Storm Uri. We've got, you know, a change of administration. We've got infrastructure focus, a lot of macro drivers And of course, innovation continues. So I'm really glad to have Priority and Arcadia with us today, two market leaders, and we'll get to just in a second getting Joel and Kevin introduced. Our agenda for webinars is pretty much the same. Every time we try to give you a recipe that seems to work, but we're going to hit some housekeeping. We'll quickly go through and do some intros so you know who's on the panel today with me and who is Enerex if you're not sure and just joining us because you're in the Kevin Boudreaux fan club. Today you'll get to hear and learn who I am, but we're really glad to ride the coattails of two stars in the industry. And then at the end, once we cover the topic, we'll try to circle back. If there's any questions that are outstanding or came up or topics we didn't hit, we'll wrap up in the end. And then we'll just try to let you know where we can go from here, give you some follow-up information and that kind of thing. And we'll get that all into an hour today. As far as housekeeping goes, if you have any issues, technical, or you need support on the call today, reach out to Joe, Joseph.Monroy at Enerex.com. You see him here on the screen today. Thanks for helping us get set up. Really appreciate it. He's put in a lot of hard work, as well as the marketing teams of both Arcadia and Priority. Shout out to all the people who helped us kind of get up and running today. We will be running the Q&A functionality in the chat, as I mentioned, and feel free to follow up with anybody after the call too today if it occurs to you. So as I mentioned a few moments ago, we are kicking off today a monthly series that we're going to run at the last Thursday of the month. Typically, we run at 10 a.m. CST. That kind of falls mid-morning for everybody in the market, so we don't run into lunch or catch people first thing in the morning. Today, we're running 1 p.m. CST to kind of accommodate some panelists today to fit into everybody's schedule, but that's usually when we try to do it. And our next panel will be about tech-enabled broker-supplier relationships. This is a trend that we see in the marketplace of especially with COVID, if anything, has accelerated this leveraging technology in the marketplace, not just on the customer side, but really almost kind of in between the broker and supplier side in new and different ways. So we've got some cool ideas there. If you think of someone you'd like to hear from on this topic that you think we should have as a panelist or something like that, feel free to drop us a line. Or if you've got any ideas on topics, we'd love to hear from you there too. As I mentioned, we've got the poll running, but feel free to just reach out to us and let us know about topics of interest. Next, I just want to say thank you to TEPA. I mean, just as a broad, I think all of us on the call are members or participate in TEPA in one way or another and have for a long time. I certainly know that Priority has been involved in TEPA since as early as I can recall. We get a lot of support in the community. TEPA is really good about sharing opportunities for learning and helping to just unite the community across all the different spectrums of service providers and suppliers and customer advocates that are out there, and really helping to tell the story of the industry. And so I just want to say thank you to Shannon and the team there and the board and everything they do for the community. We've been pleased to have been the inaugural winner of the Affiliate of the Year and nominated again the second year, and really pleased to just continue to have a presence with TEPA and a place to, again, bring positive messages about energy markets and energy professionals to the marketplace through their support. So if you're asking yourself, why are you here today? These are some questions that may have occurred to you. You may have an interest in kind of just learning about community solar. Maybe you heard something. You're thinking maybe this is a part of your service offering. Our initial evaluation of the RSVPs looks like we've got a pretty good percentage of the couple hundred folks that are with us today are brokers and service providers and kind of in that ABC segment of the population. So if you're thinking about this, or maybe you started to look at it, maybe you've got a regional focus in terms of your customer footprint and you're wondering, how does this factor into your area? Is there a play for you in your region? And maybe there's one on the horizon. So we'll talk about that today. And also maybe just curious, how do you get started? Where's the first stop? How do I get a first deal done or start to walk a customer down the path of a conversation? And then how would I even identify, if I have all these customers, who might qualify, who might want to participate, and who would be a good candidate for this type of product? So If you're asking yourselves any of those questions today, you're in the right spot. We're going to talk about a little about that and try to give a chance to hear from a couple of different angles on the panel today. I'm Nate Richards, co-founder of Enerex. I'm going to quickly do an Enerex intro for those who aren't familiar with Enerex, and then I'll ask Kevin Boudreaux, who's head of sustainability at Priority Power, to do an intro there. And then we'll pass over to Joel Gamoran, who's VP and GM at Arcadia, certainly a big name in the community solar space. And I think we'll hear from an integrated energy services provider who has solar as a big kind of peer of their portfolio with Priority, and certainly Arcadia, who's kind of bringing a new model of service provider advocating for customers into the marketplace. And certainly we've all heard a lot about, it'd be great to hear from them firsthand today. So quickly on Enerex, our purpose as a business is to connect people through technology to increase trust in retail energy markets. We are a software company. We are not a market participant. We hold no broker licenses. We're not affiliated or associated with any brokers or suppliers. But we have our flagship product, Sparkplug, which is a turnkey platform for brokers, Propeller, which is our sales management orchestration platform for suppliers, and Exchange, which is our data hub, allowing brokers and suppliers to communicate. Craft is our broker commissions management tool that we acquired earlier this year, and Exchange Live is our portal solution. So won't camp out too long on us for today, but as I said, purposefully, we are really all about creating trust in retail energy markets and energy markets in general. I think increasingly there's a blurred line, part of what we'll talk about today, of what is retail, what is a restructured market, and where did we draw the lines on that, starting to get blurred. But we love to see posts from customers who've really gotten wins for their customers on the back of our technology. And we see that as helping brokers who are the customer relationship out there, service providers, really drive value for their customers. And this webinar is really just an extension of that purposeful belief that we want to connect people up through technology that drive that trust. So with that, let me hand over to Kevin. And if you give us a quick intro of yourself and of Priority.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. I appreciate you including me today on the webinar. So Kevin Boudreaux, I manage all of the sustainability initiatives for Priority Power. A little bit about Priority Power. Priority's been in business for over 20 years, actually 20 years this year. And you know, Priority is a energy solutions provider, the largest independent energy solutions provider out there. And we're really, you know, a little bit of stats here Nate put up on the page that everybody can see, but we're really focused around 4 business segments that created the success that Priority has today. The first and foremost is on the procurement side of things, so helping customers figure out how do we go procure energy across the markets, and how do we do it in a cost-effective manner. Sounds simple. There's a lot of complexity to all that, as a lot of you are aware. Second to that is, as you get into some of these very remote areas, customers may not be able to connect to the grid efficiently. And so Priority developed a infrastructure division that creates private infrastructure, utility infrastructure, such as substations, transmission, distribution lines, et cetera. And then the 2 more recent divisions are the sustainability division, which I lead. And that comes, that's where the solar development, everything renewable, pretty much everything that involves reducing a customer's carbon footprint lies. And so we've got a lot of development going on today. We can talk a little bit more about that around community solar. And then the last division is the asset management. And this is where all things revenue oriented come from. So managing assets in the market, think about demand response, controllable load resources, et cetera. So those are the 4 pieces that Priority brings together on behalf of our customers. And here's a slide that kind of shows how we create that value with those 4 business segments, pretty much touching everything in the market except for being a supplier. Priority is not a supplier, but we do pretty much everything else in the market. The last thing slide that Nate's going to show is our sustainability division has a solar subsidiary, and we have a smart group of folks in that division that have developed over 2 gigawatts of projects across 11 states, 19 utilities, everything from utility scale to behind the meter community type solar initiatives. So pretty much everything around the solar space, our folks have touched it.
Fantastic. Well, it'll be great to hear from that unique angle of an integrated energy service provider touching solar and procurement, kind of how those two pieces may come together. And with that, Joel, you want to give us a quick intro of Arcadia?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Nate. Pleasure to be here. Thanks everyone for attending. As Nate said, I'm the General Manager and Vice President of Energy Services at Arcadia. So I run our Energy Services group. Arcadia is a nationwide energy services platform. So our mission is really to make it extremely easy for all types of customers, consumers, small businesses, larger corporates to support clean energy and where possible save on their power bill. And we've done that through building a pretty unique technology. If you jump to the next slide, we have a variety of different services that we can offer our customer base, and it's all built on the core tech infrastructure where we can take different types of clean energy products and services, whether that's community solar, the topic for today, other different points to access clean energy, rate optimization, demand side management, all of these different types of products and services in the market. Our technology is able to integrate with utilities and deliver those experiences to the customer in a single consolidated bill. So we're serving hundreds of thousands of customers across the country. We've processed hundreds of millions of dollars in customer energy bills. And I think most relevant for today, we are among the largest managers of community solar in the country with over 0.5 gigawatt under management. So what I want to close with is that we really are at an inflection point in the community solar market. Arcadia has been active in the market for years, but we are really at the point now where this is a market that is achieving scale. And I wanted to highlight where some of these opportunities are, which I'm sure we'll hone in on more as we get to the webinar today. But you can see, roughly a dozen states today where there are active, robust markets with opportunities today for customers to subscribe, support community solar projects and save. And then, upwards of 20 states that we believe are opportunities for market development and that are sort of, well underway on the policy side today. So exciting time in the market and great to be here, Nate.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, guys. As you can see, these guys really know everything about solar, from building new resource on the grid, tying it in, and to taking that capacity to customers and all the way through to managing all the data that happens throughout the life cycle. So we're going to touch on all of those points. And really today, our focus is around how does community solar interact with services maybe traditionally brought by the broker market. Today, I'm going to use the word broker. We're fully aware, certainly at Enerex, that does not accurately describe many energy service providers. It's a maybe placeholder or generic term. Certainly they're aggregators, brokers, consultants, advisory services, and everything in between, mixtures of both of those. Not trying to put everybody in the same bucket today, but today we'll talk about brokers. Just know that we mean that umbrella community. And speaking of community, we wanted to just start really by not assuming that everyone, when they hear the term community solar, that A, we know what that really means. Where do we draw the boundary? How do we define it? And then two, that recognizing that there's a wide variety of terminology, some of which is 100% maybe parity with community solar, and some of it is sort of an approximation or maybe pilot type projects that could lead into a community solar type of deal structure. And so maybe we'd start there. Maybe Joel, if you could maybe kind of extending on your map that we just looked at, talk about some of the terminology, some of the variables that are out there in terms of how do we define community solar.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you can see depicted on the slide, the terminology will vary. There is sort of a common thread here in all of these programs that you're talking about a remotely located solar or other renewable asset that is installed at the distribution system. So typically, in the sort of 1 to 5 megawatt range, these aren't utility scale projects, they're on the distribution system. And the sort of key element is that from the policy side of things, you are able to, as a customer, whether a consumer or in many states, a business, subscribe to the solar energy that is being produced. It's not a physical connection, it's more of a financial connection, and receive credit for that energy generation on your utility bill. And the community solar provider, whether that's Arcadia or another company, will actually be billing the customer for the benefits they're receiving, but at a guaranteed discount. And so that's kind of the key to all of these different programs. There are certainly nuances, which we'll get into more about who can participate, exactly how it works, what types of projects can participate. But that's the sort of thread across all of these different markets. Is you have a remotely located project on the distribution system that can provide bill savings to customers of all different types.
Fantastic. Now, Kevin, on our pre-call last week, we talked about kind of the history of community solar. Maybe that's sort of the term of art today, but this idea of a virtual net meeting or three-party agreements, this is something that you've done structuring around for different types of customers over the years. Could you speak a little bit about kind of just the history and kind of how some of the different structures have come to be?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's vast is the first word that comes to mind, right? A lot of what we did was in the ERCOT space. ERCOT does not have a program for community solar. And I'll just take a step back to add to what Joel said. What we think about is that smaller kind of distributed level project, front of the meter, that's shared between a group or class of customers. And it's in the community somewhere, right? Normally we like to put it somewhere it's got a touchy feel aspect to it. And so just one of the projects that we did back in the day was right outside of the Houston zone, right? So you could, take kids on field trips out there to see the actual site, really see where your power's coming from at the end of the day. Some individuals, some organizations are putting it in the middle of a new housing community complex and trying to subscribe those new homes on the program. So it's actually right there on site, right? So it's a shared kind of touchy feel aspect to it. But yeah, no, it's vast is the word, Nate. It just depends on what you're trying to accomplish at the end of the day. And so as an example, we started off with a subscription structure and did block type concepts. And then as we got into it, kind of switched to more of a fixed price block structure where we could go out to the market and actually create a hedge position for a customer, whether it was residential or commercial. We had both on the facility at the same time. So it just depends at the end of the day what you're trying to accomplish. The market's changing on us as we speak. You've got a lot of private equity coming into the scene. They want to monetize tax equity. That's kind of changing how the programs work. They're creating special purpose entities to kind of sit in the middle of all this stuff. So it's you really got to understand not just how the customer side of it works, but also how the development side of it works. And how do you really structure this? How do you monetize the tax equity? Can you push out the environmental attributes to the customer, or do you need them to monetize the project? So that's kind of what we think about, Nate, when we go through it all. We have both sides of it. Priority sits on the development side, but we also recently acquired Satori Energy that sits on the customer side of the equation. So we're actually sitting on both sides of the equation as priority.
And I would add to that. So, when you think about community solar, the way we think about it, I think the sort of what has become sort of the common umbrella definition, these are policy-driven markets. And so there's always in a policy-driven market, there's a policy goal that leads to the creation of these markets, right? And so in the case of community solar, it is really sort of an equity goal. You have net metering rules that have existed for decades in virtually every state, but those net metering rules are really only advantageous to a small sliver of the population, people who can put solar on their roof, buildings who control their roof, and so forth. And so the goal of these community solar programs is really to open up access to a much larger swath of the population. And so you'll see a lot of focus on residential customer participation, but increasingly you're also seeing opportunities for business customers to participate, because you have many of the same constraints in the small business or even corporate world of not controlling your roof. And so there's a desire among policymakers to open the doors to supporting solar, and in particular through community solar, where it is a larger scale, more economical installation, but can then serve a large portion of the population. So it's kind of a win-win way to achieve carbon reduction goals in a cost-effective manner.
Fantastic. Well, I'm gonna try to summarize kind of the key points from both of y'all's definitions here. But this is I think I got a framing of this from NREL, but it really is about shared financial benefits, right? It's, as Joel said, it's not a physical connection, it's a financial connection, right? Of a distributed renewable generation source with an exclusive set of customers. I mean, it's not, these programs have to be enrolled in, they have to be subscribed to, and they provide benefits to their subscriber base, not to all customers. So that it's not like a resource that goes into the rate base, right? As opposed, it's a different type of resource in that regard. It provides it to a named exclusive set of customers as opposed to building into the rate base, and then who choose to subscribe. So typically there's an opt-in. There are some sort of innovative opt-out type programs happening in different places, but primarily it's sort of an opt-in that there's a subscription that's made. And I think as we're talking to kind of brokers today, some parallels to retail markets are this idea of customer choice. And so that I think one of the takeaways here is that your customers do have a choice, probably in many of the states that you're already working in, some kind of choice is out there for them. And as their advisor, it would be a great idea for you to get to know this product and what choices do they have and sort of how do you navigate that. And so we'll kind of talk about that maybe next, which is what is the market opportunity for brokers in CS? So a couple of points about this is Joel mentioned the policy. It's a policy-driven market. So, maybe I'll let Joel maybe pick back up there and talk about what is driving this new capacity bill. Maybe Kevin, you can hit this from a tax equity and sort of what's creating project demand financially underpinning that in terms of the people that want to own these assets. And then I'll pick back up after that.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, kind of going back to the origins of this market, the idea was to bring a model similar to net metering to a larger group of people, because it really is arbitrary that net metering is only available to people who can physically place the asset on their property, right? And so if you think about what's driving new capacity build, it really is the opportunity to access something closer to a full retail rate, including both supply and, in many markets, the transmission and distribution components of the rate, as basically the value of the energy that you're producing, which is very different than if you are developing a project and sort of selling through a PPA or selling into the wholesale markets, right?
Right.
You can actually access that sort of full value stack on a customer's bill. And there are a variety of sort of different flavors of this, whether it's a pure net metering treatment, or in New York, which is one of the largest markets, you have something called the value stack, where they have done the academic exercise of trying to determine exactly how valuable is solar produced at a given location, and so credit the system for that, including things like environmental value. So ultimately what's driving the new capacity bill is really the economics of these projects are really strong, but you need an offtake solution to ensure that you have customers to sell the power to. And so that's where many of the folks on this call are really important pieces, really important components and participants in this market, because you have access to clients that you've been working with for years, and now you can kind of bring them this new product. And that's really sort of the role Arcadia is trying to play here, is aggregating these two sides of the market, right? You have dozens, if not hundreds, of developers building projects, and all of you in the audience have these deep client relationships. Now you have a new choice that can benefit them. And so really the goal is to bring those two sides of the market together and allow renewable energy development to flourish.
So Kevin, maybe you can speak to kind of how the demand for projects comes about, and then how about cited? You know, how do projects get cited geographically, and what the relationship is there between that and offtake?
Yeah, I'll just add to Joel's points. You know, a lot of these projects, and there was a question that popped up on, are there restrictions in PJM around these programs, right? And they're state-initiated programs, to Joel's point, right? So there are a lot of restrictions around them, capacity size, things of that nature, anchor tenants. I mean, there's a host of things depending on the state you're dealing with and the level that you're at. So there are restrictions to consider. And then a lot of this is just being where you see the development happening is around where the incentives are, right? It's a lot of the regional greenhouse gas initiative states. It's where the SREC values are going through the roof. I mean, those added incentives add to the favorable economics of the project, right? Not only is solar coming down in cost, but you have all these state incentives that you can monetize. So that's a huge point. I think that's what's driving a lot of the capacity. Also from a development perspective, it's just across the board, everybody's trying to get in on these programs for whatever reason. From the customer side, it's, you know, they have a mandate that not necessarily at a residential level, but at a commercial level, maybe they have some sort of mandate that's coming through that they have to be a certain percentage renewable. The finance community is pushing it really hard across the board. You may have ESG reporting standards in the future coming from the SEC and other agencies. So it's being driven across the board, and just the money is there. You know, people are backing out of more fossil fuel oriented businesses and looking at to put their money behind renewables. So just across the board, you've got a lot of pieces that are driving the capacity. And as far as for siting these, you've got to look at where you've got available land, right? And then how do you factor in? I mean, land leases are a big deal. Who's driving those land lease costs? You know, how are you helping the community with these sort of land lease optionalities and those pieces? So you just got to look at putting the whole piece together. There are a lot of options that come with developing a project.
And I'll make one other comment, which is I think one of the most exciting things about this market is the growth and the new opportunities that are popping up across the country. So if you think about deregulated retail markets, you know, it has been a relatively, frankly, a completely stable set of states that have been open over the last 20 plus years. Community solar is a different story. I mean, if you look at this map, you know, like I said, about a dozen states today with active markets, but, you know, you're seeing really the dominoes start to fall and new states enacting programs, existing states expanding their programs. One example, Wisconsin just announced a couple of days ago, there's actually a group of Republican lawmakers that is introducing this bill. It's a really a pretty unique program in that it can kind of appeal broadly across the political spectrum, because you have the sort of energy independence, energy competition side of things, and then you also have the environmental impact and sort of social justice side of it. So it's really a policy-driven product that's continuing to grow and scale across the country.
Fantastic. One other point I wanted to make, and so just for people who might not be aware about, you know, how much of these projects are accessible to, like, you know, the market, and as far as where the projects get built, that less than 25% or less are built in munis and co-ops. And so a lot of projects are built inside IOU traditional service territories where most of your customers are today, right? And so that there's a significant synergy as far as where projects are and where your customer base might be today. And so definitely worth taking a look at. And that kind of takes us maybe to this next point around how does community solar interact with retail supply? I think this is something that is maybe not a mystery, but maybe a concern or a head scratch, or, you know, do these things coexist? Are they at odds? Is it a mixed bag? And then how, you know, when they're, you know, either side by side or one replacing the other, for customers, for brokers, for suppliers, like what's the interaction? And I think I wanted to start with touching on one point here, which is, you know, does a customer the contracting life cycles, right? So there's the contract life cycles of retail supply, which we all are very familiar with. But what does community solar contract life cycle look like, and how might that be different from a traditional? So maybe Joel, you could talk about the customer experience. That's something you guys focus on a lot. What is that customer experience like in the community solar world?
Yeah, absolutely. So community solar is definitely different from retail because you're not hedging, you're not sort of taking a commodity position. It is a savings that is indexed off of utility rates. And so these are really sort of evergreen guaranteed savings contracts. So, we typically see contracts that are going out 20, 25 years, often with an ability to terminate earlier, certainly for residential customers with a very, easy sort of on and off capability.
Now that's a stark contrast right there. Not to jump over you, but I mean, like, if you're a retail person who hasn't really done a whole lot outside of retail energy, thinking about 20, 25-year contract terms, boy, that doesn't give you pause right there. Now we're going to come back on the next segment and talk about value proposition, but that's just something to keep in mind. And let's touch back on that. Sorry, Joel, keep going there on the customer experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, again, for your typical residential customer, I mean, it is an extremely simple sign up. It's probably 2 minutes. The contract terms are very flexible, easy on and off. The product is really designed to accommodate a diverse pool of small offtake. When you get into commercial contracts where a single customer may be actually representing a pretty significant portion of a project and therefore a significant revenue exposure for the project, you typically will see some stronger teeth to contracts, and those often are negotiated. But again, it is a guaranteed savings product, so you're not really taking on risk. It's more sort of what sort of willingness or procurement authority are you dealing with at the other side? Can they actually enter a long-term deal? Do you want me to touch on the sort of interaction with retail?
Yeah, or Kevin, I know that you guys are doing some of this work through your Satori acquisition. Any thoughts about kind of the broker world or how these two products or services interact, both from a dialogue with the customer? How do you not feel like you're competing with yourself? You just told them that this retail supply is a great deal, and now you're going to come in and say, well, actually I have this other thing you also need to take a look at. And then also the conversation with retail suppliers, I think, is an interesting dynamic, how they might be looking at community solar type arrangements out there. Any commentary on those fronts?
Yeah, I think you just got to look at what the program's offering, right? I mean, it kind of goes into the value proposition that we're going to talk about. Overall, you look at some of the studies that have been done, NRELs out there you brought up. I mean, all these over 80% of these projects are a net positive benefit to the customer. So it's not a hard conversation to have from the customer side of it. The term is a big deal. Customers do have more issues with the longer the term is.
Sure.
Depending on what market you're in. So you just have to look at what are you doing with the program, right? How do you get to the savings? How do you structure the payments? How are you going to credit the bill? You have to figure out all the pieces, and really transparency is key. You got to lay out if you look at all the complaints of customers out there, it's just there's no transparency. They sign up and then they're getting something that they didn't feel like they signed up for, right? And so if you can lay out all the pieces up front to a customer, I think that's got a lot of benefit. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, let's stay on this topic just for a second, because I do think for this audience it's really important to sort of dive into the weeds a little bit on community solar and retail, because these are different products, and in the vast majority of markets they're completely complementary to one another. The way community solar works in most markets is that there is a monetary credit that's being applied to a customer's bill, and so it doesn't interfere at all with their load, with their usage, with their supply rate. with your purchase of receivables arrangement, if you're a supplier, there's sort of no interference. You can actually save on top of whatever your rate plan is, or even if you're on the default utility rate. There are a selection of markets, most prominently Illinois,
Sure.
which I've spoken with many of you on the call about this already,
for sure.
where you are actually sort of competing for the same line item between community solar and retail, and there is actually an impact on load, and it's sort of a different story. But those are much more few and far between. In most cases, they work in unison.
Joel, as people move to Arcadia has got this model where you sort of represent the customer's interests and sort of produce a suite of different services onto one bill. How does the supplier community think about community solar? I know it exists side by side, but I've also heard dialogue where it feels like in some markets, the utilities sort of land grabbing back their customer base, right, with some of these programs, as far as whose brand does the customer identify with as their service provider. And that's always a dynamic. Even brokers and suppliers who happily coexist and obviously are partners in virtually every commercial deal out there. Of course, everyone wants the customer to have some sense of brand equity and participation in their brand. What's been your experience so far?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue in retail that land grab happened a long time ago with purchase of receivables. And I would say that the brokers are really the ones that have the stronger customer relationship in that equation.
Sure. Absolutely.
And so community solar is, again, another sort of arrow in your quiver as a broker to deliver value to customers. I do think that, specifically with the way Arcadia has approached billing, we have the opportunity to create that stronger customer relationship so that they can, to Kevin's point, transparently see the impact of the product that they're receiving on the bill every month.
Sure.
But as far as how community solar affects retail supply, I think the ship is kind of sailed with purchase of receivables, unless you have larger clients where you're using dual billing.
Yeah.
Right. The billing structure is a big to do with that, whether UCB or SCB or dual bill, right? In terms of that brand presentation, who does the customer identify with if you pull them as their power provider, right? And how well do they understand the different layers of the cake that come together to provide this service at the end of the day? Kevin, did you have something there? I think I heard you.
I was just going to reiterate the billing point, man. That's a huge component to all of this. I mean, you think about develop a project and all the pieces to do that, and then marketing to bring to get the project subscribed, bringing the customers in, right? But actually being able to get it on a bill effectively at the end of the day, whether it's a KW block, a KWH, partial subscription, partial VNAM or full VNAM, whatever it is, it's like you've got to be able to bill that in the end of the day. And I think Arcadia and those guys have done a really good job of putting that together. Nate, you guys are very aware of how all those pieces fit. But just from a supplier perspective coming into it, it's a huge component of going do a program like this, is being able to bill it.
Yeah. I think we've seen, as we've explored with our broker customers, a variety of different, I'll say, levels of sophistication and maturity in that billing component. You see assets that want to direct bill and sort of sell their own subscriptions and kind of stand on their own feet, and maybe they're going to build their own software, or they're finding a software vendor out there that's going to do community solar billing. There's some emerging products and services out there that are representing farms, right, to their subscriber base. We'll talk in a minute about the data intensity and the workflow, how that's very, very different, as opposed to what we know in traditional retail, and how that billing component and also just recognition of all of the credits in that three-way agreement. How do I make sense of all that? It's a lot more numbers than you might be used to in the retail supply world. Well,
Nate, there are a couple of questions that I think are worth just answering quickly.
Yeah, I think I saw a couple too. Go right ahead, jump in.
Yeah, so I was going to take
just to you there.
Perfect. Yeah, I was just going to take a couple of these. So, how does Arcadia see the future as it relates to the new consolidated billing programs in New York? I think that's a good a good one to address quickly, because again, New York is one of the largest markets here, and consolidated billing is a new form of billing where the utility is actually paying the solar project directly, but crediting the customer only their sort of net savings portion of the credit. So if the customer is receiving a 10% savings and they received $1,000 of credit, 100 would go on the customer's utility bill. The customer wouldn't have to pay anything additional, and the remaining 900 would be paid directly by the utility to the solar project. We're actually really supportive of this model at Arcadia because it eliminates a lot of the credit risk involved, and that's something that has been a part of our core from the beginning. Is we don't check customer credit scores for residential customers, and we've tried to serve the sort of lower income customer segments. It's a great.
Goes back to that policy goal, right, of access, right?
Exactly.
I think you think about the framing of the New York structure. It's about how can we eliminate any objection here to taking on a customer, and that credit piece, right, remains as you discussed earlier, part of the structure of bringing an asset online and making out the economics. And so now you've just dealt with one of those big risks by having the capital not move back and forth, but really rest primarily with the utility.
Absolutely. And you can still provide that billing experience for the customer where they can be paying their utility bill and they can see the savings that they're getting, which is something that the utility does not present very clearly. So there's still a lot of value to the billing platform. And then the one other one that I think we could just touch on quickly is there's a question about what if a project is less than 100% subscribed? And effectively, then the project is going to just be selling the excess energy at avoided cost. And so, substantially lower rate than you would get pushing it through a subscriber bill in the community solar program.
Right. That kind of gets to your point about the ability to participate all the way in the value stack, right, for these programs. I mean, for the projects, that is, as they think about marketing versus selling in a traditional wholesaler as part of a rate base or a PPA. So you're kind of back to that more wholesale pricing for your excess capacity. Great question. So let's keep moving. Just in the interest of time, let's talk about this. This is sort of a juicy one, which is the value proposition. A couple of these points we've already hit on. I think there may be a few new items here, but number one, to know, certainly from a broker's perspective, when I talk to my customer, besides obviously the move to green supply, sort of the ability to sort of recognize that in their own brand identity or strategic goals, ESG and so forth. Beyond that is guaranteed savings versus a price. So retail supply, you've got a quoted price or a quoted price structure in certain, whether you're talking about index or other structured products, but it's sort of price oriented times a quantity. Versus a guaranteed index savings off of a standard offer service rate or an IOU default service rate. Another thing we touched on already is long-term contracting. So to some customers, I think this could go either way, right? Certainly, if you move into a small business scenario, probably a 25-year agreement is something that might seem outside of the norm of the conversation. I know that there are a lot of movements and structures out there that allow people shorter term contracting opportunities. Probably worth definitely noting in case people are like, well, I could never sell this to small business. They're not going to be around in 25 years. They might even be alive in 25 years, the people who's my buyer, right? So you think about what they're doing. But I think the way to think of it is if they wanted to go long term, right? Let's say maybe on the second point, you've got a poor load factor customer in a market with very little headroom, who's not really looking at a savings opportunity on retail supply. And you've got another tool, as Joel said, an arrow in your quiver here, where maybe there's a guaranteed savings, a different way to frame your value proposition as their advisor to help them find savings that isn't necessarily about moving to traditional retail supply or some combination, right, of those structures that nets out to a better economic for the end customer. So certainly some different creative ways to deliver value. And then, I don't know, Kevin or Joel, if you want to touch on, but the different markets have different bill crediting mechanisms. We've touched on a couple of different places where it might be against the utility portion of the bill. Maybe it's the full utility portion and their supply, depending on what type of credit mechanism you're using. any comments about kind of the value of a bill crediting mechanism? Joel, you touched on, for customers with bad or no credit, right? There's an access value right there.
Yeah, I guess I would just sort of reiterate, it's really not an either or in most markets, right? Again,
Sure.
let's
With some notable exceptions.
Illinois is kind of the 100-pound gorilla, but there are opportunities in Illinois as well. But in general, across the vast majority of these markets, it's not an either or. So you can have your retail offering, you can shop for a new rate or new plan every year, every 3 years, whatever it is. But you can have your 25-year community solar contract locked in. That's always going to give you guaranteed savings. And as Nate said, unless you're an extremely large customer, a university, municipality, there will be ways out of the contract. It's not a 25-year buyout.
Right. And as far as how brokers can add value to their brokerage, I think Priority is a great example of a broker that's really transformed. Again, I'm using broker there, as I said, as an umbrella term. Certainly don't want to pigeonhole anyone, and Priority is obviously a great example of this, but someone who's really transformed and offering a multi-pronged attack to deal with customer energy needs and really address all the whole continuum. And so if you are a broker today that's primarily delivering retail supply, from an Enerex perspective, we really see an opportunity here to add a second or third or fourth service offering that you may not be offering, which really helps you. Every salesperson likes to have more tools in the bag when they're going to make one sales call, sell two products. I think that's always a plus. And the ability to not only add value to customers, but also monetize, right, some of that value with respect to the brokerage itself in exchange for bringing, more products and services to your customer base. Kevin, any thoughts on the value prop before we move on to kind of the technology question?
Yeah, I think it's super important to just understand. I'll go back to the transparency thing because it always comes up for us, right? So you have to do the math at the end of the day, right? I mean, if I use rooftop solar as an example, right? If somebody's coming to your house, a Sunrun or a Tesla or whoever, and laying down the what this thing's going to cost you or whatever, I mean, they're going to sit there for 30 minutes and go through the math with you, right? Here's all the pieces of the puzzle. Here's your current supply cost. Here's the cost of the system. You're locking into a whatever 10, 20 year contract. And this is what it looks like. Here's the map, right? Do you save or do you not? That's what has to be done, right? Yeah. And then I think there are other things that are coming into play that are super important to the customer today, as maybe has been different in the past. It's, more on the commercial side maybe, but environmental attributes like, can I claim sustainability off of this thing, right? Am I really purchasing renewable energy? What am I doing, right? And so I think that's a huge component, and we're going to see a lot more of it in the future.
That's a great point about the non-financial benefits, right? We talked about community solar when we were defining it as financial benefits, but I forgot to mention, I had a footnote there that, certainly there are programs where you can participate in the REC, right? Part of what the deal can be structured to receive those other types of credits that are maybe non-financial benefits off of the underlying asset or participate in different ways beyond just the economics. So really important there, Kevin, to point out that, this is really your opportunity as a broker to add value, right? As you put the deal together, as you understand your customer needs, and just like with retail supply, really listening and working with your supply relationships to bring that product that the customer needs. So the last thing today really is to talk about the importance of software for market entry. And believe it or not, this when we were brainstorming topics, this did not come from Enerex. I think that, the reality is that we've talked about today is that there's a lot of data, right, that has to come together, both as you're assessing candidacy for different types of programs, understanding what the customer's goals are that you're trying to meet with this tool. Like any tool any arrow in your quiver, just to continue that analogy, and which one to reach for what type of customer is part of really what sets you apart as you service your customer base. Joel or Kevin, you guys have both come from firms who've made significant, investments in your own capabilities. What kind of what are you seeing as far as this ability to like keep up with data and tracking
Yeah.
subscriptions, commissions, workflow, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say, it really is critical to have the right software in place to manage these programs. And at Arcadia in particular, with the utility integrations we've built, we have a really efficient way to access a customer's data across all their different accounts from a sort of single entry point. And it's more than just usage, right? We need to know things like rate class, historical cost structure. There are actually a lot of different components that play into what a savings estimate looks like, how we confirm eligibility for one program or a different program, and so forth. And I would say there's a lot more innovation that's needed to make this more streamlined. So we are really excited to be working with Enerex to help sort of simplify and streamline the process for brokers so that based on your sort of book of business, you can identify where the opportunity is with your book and point resources in the right direction.
Fantastic. Well, thanks there, Joel. Yeah, just moving to the next slide here. We are excited also to be working with Arcadia. I think the idea of bringing a simplified and streamlined way to sort of identify and transact for brokers in their customer base who maybe aren't as technical or don't want to build out their own infrastructure from a data and software asset perspective. We'll be bringing in the Sparkplug platform the ability to transact community solar deals. So in addition to your consulting deals, your aggregation deals, your retail supply brokerage deals, now you'll be able to track your community solar deals alongside that as part of your overall energy services portfolio. And begin to try to bring some of the same streamlining and programmatic, repeatable, learnable process to this little bit chaotic world of the commercial angle of community solar. And with that, again, let's just, if we can, just jump over to Q&A. There's still quite a few questions outstanding. Kevin, Joel, you guys want to, zero in on any of these that you want to address on the call today? And certainly if there's any outstanding that we don't get to, we'll be handing over the list of questions to each of the panelists, and feel free to have them follow up with each of you individually if there's a longer conversation.
Yeah, I just answered a few of them. I think one that was popping up was the environmental attributes. I think we addressed that pretty well today, Nate. So if a customer doesn't want to, give a program administrator their login credentials to get data access, then they probably not participating in the program, right? So you have certain requirements. I think you have certain restrictions of these programs that you have to follow to make them work. That's just the way they are. So just depends. You got to, look at the fine print, know what kind of program you're getting into as a customer, and know what you're offering your customer, or know what you can offer your customer, I think is the key.
That's a great point.
I can address a couple of the sort of market specific ones as well. So there's a question about New York and limited availability. I do think that is going to change soon. There should be more capacity coming online. The goal in New York State is currently 6 gigawatts of solar by 2025. To date, roughly 2/3 of that has come from community solar. We believe that they're going to at least double that goal by 2030, which will mean a lot more community solar projects coming online and more capacity available for your customer base. And then similarly, the question about Illinois, do we see resolution coming to Illinois supply, especially for small residential accounts? I think for residential accounts, yes, we are seeing engagement that there's going to be some changes made to ensure that sort of the way that credits are flowing through from a retail supplier to a residential customer's account is working properly. I would say there's less clarity of how that will be handled for larger customer classes.
Yeah, I think, anecdotally, I can say that some of our customers are finding, because of the kind of mutual exclusivity in relation with retail supply, are finding that as we mentioned earlier, customers that are not candidates or don't see a great opportunity to save on retail supply are being, this is looked at as sort of a second chair. I think there's another kind of end run opportunity where, a customer is on a retail supply and, and maybe they're not your customer, or we're seeing people use it competitively as like, hey, no one's talked to you about this product, and let me have this other conversation with you about it. So again, one of the benefits of being, having more than one arrow in your quiver is the ability to kind of address different needs for customers in maybe a way that they may not be met today. Any other of these that we want to take on the call today? Are most brokers selling community solar? I can tell you anecdotally, no. There's a question from Peter here. I think that like the early days of retail supply, and certainly Kevin and Joel can comment on this, but there's not a great central repository of facts that you could just go to that will tell you how to get one of these deals done. There's very much have to know and very much subtlety still present in the marketplace, particularly around commercial, right? Program design, opportunity, where's the capacity? How do I build a relationship with an asset? Whether or not to go through an aggregator, there's a number of different, and by the way, I'm using aggregator in a different tone than we would think about it in retail supply. But someone who represents multiple assets that helps them market their subscription base and sort of bring on that capacity. So there's a lot of questions out there. This is really what we hope to bring, right? Which is a streamlined, simplified version of community solar that is appealing to the broker community that we know and love and have served for a decade, and that some amount of the 70 plus terawatt hours a year of procurement that happens in our platform can also see additional benefit from having more product exposure, more opportunities to save and achieve ESG goals. But I know a lot of brokers are looking for solutions for customers. So that's really kind of what we see anecdotally in the broker community. It's still very much a novelty in the commercial space. I don't want to talk about specific margins and give away anybody's secret sauce here. There's a question about, what can a broker make? I think I'll answer it in two ways. One is just like a retail supply, a broker can make whatever a supplier will pay that broker, right? And so I think community solar is not immune to the same sort of effects of there's a broad range of fee structures, payment structures that we've seen out there. But I think as the market becomes more standardized, I think the economic sharing is something that's yet to be hammered out. Another thing I'll make here is that the question is particularly framed in sort of average per kWh, like you might think of a retail margin. Not all payments are kWh denominated, right? Some are capacity unit denominated, depending on who you're subscribing with and contracting with. So it's definitely just sort of another wild card to think about. How do you value this relationship, both as a broker on your books and the value proposition to the customer? I don't know if Kevin or Joel, you want to speak to any of those kind of practical broker type questions there. Anything to add or pick up any of these others?
Maybe the one that's just worth quickly tying off on here is there's a question about customers being signed up well in advance, and that is absolutely the nature of the market in many of these cases. There is again, going back to it's a policy-driven market, there's often a cap on how much total solar can be built. And to sort of ensure that you get a spot, you may have to sign up, 18 months before the project is actually built. But if you wait until closer to the project turning on, it's going to be full.
Great point. All right, there's one more here, which I think is a good one, which is around, do they participate in the benefits to the cap tag? That's a very technical one, but also an interesting subtlety. And then, do they pay transportation charges, delivery charges on their bill credit, or how does that work?
Yeah, I can take that too. So there is no cap tag impact. And similarly, there's really no impact to the customer's utility charges. But what happens is they're getting this additional negative line item. So whatever their supply cost would have been, whatever their T&D cost would have been, that's still showing up on the bill. Maybe that adds up to $1,000, but you'll get a new line item called community solar credits for negative $1,000. And so that's how it works. So it's really not directly affecting load, cap tag, or rates.
Right. And so Yeah, it's not the physical dynamics of how your customer uses energy, and therefore also all of the benefits that you might bring as a service provider in terms of demand side services, power factor correction, efficiency services, and so forth, still present a benefit to lower the overall bill, so that you're not giving up that product option, right, that you might bring in concert with community solar. That's one of the beautiful things, is it does live, because it's because it's so simple in terms of just a straight credit system. It does live beautifully beside and in the portfolio of services that we think a broker might be offering their customers today. There are lots more questions, even more coming in now. I'm going to check. We're a little bit over time at 2:04. I want to be respectful. I will definitely make sure that we circulate and circle back to the folks that are asking additional questions, some questions about the Florida market. Obviously, it's unique. Each one of these markets we could dive into and probably have a separate webinar on each market. But certainly we'll try and follow up, or have Joel and Kevin follow up if that makes sense to them after. So just to wrap us up today, I wanted to just invite everyone. Thank you for coming. We had several hundred people attend today. Very, very exciting to sort of be back in the saddle and bringing great content to the energy markets today. Thank you most of all to my esteemed colleagues here, Kevin and Joel, and thank you to their firms for allowing them to come and speak today, which is a rare opportunity to hear about other vendors out there in the marketplace and kind of how they're seeing customer opportunities to share. So thank you for the spirit of kind of collegiality out there, and certainly to leading firms. Next month, we're going to talk about the tech-enabled broker-supplier relationship on August 26th at 10 a.m. Central. We're seeing a lot of changes, especially COVID. A lot of people made technology investments in this relationship, and some significant transition going on with some new market entrants, as well as some existing market participants who've made some significant investments and starting to see fruit from that. So look forward to hearing more about this in the weeks to come, and we'll see you last Thursday in August for this topic. Thanks again to everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Kevin and Priority. Thank you, Joel and Arcadia. Excited about new partnership and how to bring more value to the broker community, and ultimately to the customer, through all of us working together as an energy community. So thanks. And with that,